I'd like to begin with a quote from the Guide to the Training of Future Priests concerning the instruments of social communication put out by the Congregation for Catholic Education in 1986, written by Cardinal Baum. He wrote, "As an antidote to wasting time, sometimes even alienating indulgence in superficial media programs, students should be guided to the love and practice of reading, study, silence, and meditation. They should be encouraged and be provided with the necessary conditions for community dialogue and prayer. This will serve to remedy the isolation and self-absorption caused by the unidirectional communication of the mass media, and will revive the authentic and absolute value proper to the Christian profession and the priestly ministry, particularly those of obedience and evangelic poverty, which the materialistic and consumeristic vision of human existence offered by the instruments of social communication very often rejects or ignores." Again, another example of how astute and clear the Church is about how media can be so useful. And yet, isn't it paradoxical that this media that can so foster communication for good and evangelization and participate in really the healthy development of the human person can also do the opposite, contribute to an isolation, in fact, to a deformation of the dignity of the human person. The aspect of withdrawal and isolation from a social group is the next effect that I'll consider during this session. The first one is procrastination. Does a sister go online to be distracted or to avoid doing something that she may not feel that she's quite up to doing? St. Thomas Aquinas refers to procrastination as one of the species of fear, where I avoid something because I don't really want to do it. For example, you have a big term paper to write, or you need to call back an angry parent, and you think, oh, I would prefer avoiding that. Let me go online and see if I have an email to answer, or something like that. So we can all relate to procrastination as something to avoid, something that's a little anxiety-provoking. If we allow ourselves to continue to insert substitutions for some things that we don't necessarily feel up to doing, or maybe don't necessarily want to do, then we can unwittingly fall into a habit of avoidance or procrastination, or delaying that which needs to get done in a timely manner. But humanly, as I consider this as a psychiatrist, maybe not looking at what it is that's bothering me, and maybe addressing my anxiety in a more fruitful way. Why am I anxious? What can I do to allow myself to be freer to engage in something that maybe I pull back from? And so I think we can also fall into a habit of procrastination, no longer related to a discomfort. It becomes a habitual substitution. And I think that's something that we need to really look at with regards to online accessibility. I spoke yesterday of how accessible this media is and how it doesn't cost anything, at least monetarily, but yet it could cost us time. How much time can be spent that could have been spent beginning to grade those papers that I may not like to do, or writing a newsletter, or whatever it is that's actually ours to do during the course of time of our apostolic duty. So if I'm beginning to substitute something that is a bit more pleasurable, something that might be more interesting, such as emailing friends or family outside of the community, what can happen is some of the little irritations that I have with another sister in the community don't get addressed. So I begin to procrastinate maybe attending to it, and then it just kind of sits there. And then the next time that I engage with this sister, the unresolved memory of that little irritation comes to the fore, not to really bring up the disturbance, but it's the psyche's way of saying, wait a minute, this is not resolved. Let me bring it up so you can address it. But if we don't take the time to become aware of what's stirring within, then it just becomes another little emotional stir, and then we begin to relate to that sister maybe with a tinge of this memory of an irritation that wasn't attended to. And what happens? We add a little bit of that to our present encounter. And subtly, I may become unwittingly a bit more withdrawn from that sister, because I already am allowing a coloring of how I feel to affect my present engagement with her. And I think this can be not an intentional effect, but can be an actual effect over time with those sisters that we actually live with, if we're not really careful. So if I don't address some of these hurts within the community that often are not that significant, sometimes can be more significant, but we don't even address the less significant ones, so they become as significant in my effect of avoidance of this sister or lack of being open to her. And yet I'm then emailing these persons in the apostolate or family, and I'm inclined to write a little affirmative statement, my regards to you, or I'm praying for you, or they may be sending something like that to me. So if you remember yesterday, I spoke of email has a way of capturing these little bursts of human currency called attention. And if I attach little positive statements, little closing remarks, or little opening positive greetings, I may begin to falsely think that I have more positive relationships with these persons that I'm relating to on email than I actually am with those that I'm living with in reality. And so my feeling begins to move my action when it's not actually true. And so the executive function of our intellect that Sister Mary Prudence so beautifully spoke of yesterday becomes less active, and I let my passions or my emotions, which have a powerful movement, don't they? I can say that I love someone, and that can really move me, but sometimes it doesn't have a powerful movement of itself. But if I'm angry with someone or I'm afraid, that emotion has a weight that moves my action. And if I begin to feel better or feel like these people out there like me better, then that's going to move my action, maybe to a lower level of functioning. And that's what's being described by this untoward behavioral effect of online relationships. Now, that's not the only thing we can do with these. Again, I'm not saying that this is across the board, but it is an effect that is being observed that I think unless we take time to ponder and pray about, we can all fall into. And it's not just with media. We can do that with one another even before this media. But I think this media becomes more an occasion to fall into that because of the little burst of contact that are part of how it works. They're not going to be extended means of ongoing dialogue in this media. So at its extreme, what ends up happening is that I begin to feel more gratified or more pleasurable attention that is much more immediately available to me in these emails or in these social networking sites. And that I communicate more to persons that I actually do not live with and sometimes do not even actually know. And that this lack of engagement with my community and the sisters that I'm side by side with, sometimes rub by rub with, ends up giving me the false impression of a lack of belonging. And so I begin to be less committed to engaging in where I truly belong. And that can break down that aspect of a spirituality of communion. Sister Mary Prunes will speak in the next session on spirituality of communion and dialogue, but I think it erodes that fiber away. And so it creates an inappropriate and actually inaccurate sense of maybe feeling more like I belong because I have an affective affinity and sense of connection with those persons online. But that's not true. I really don't have a deeper connection. Feelings aren't facts. Just because I feel like a failure doesn't mean that I am a failure. But I think we fall into making feelings facts, which is a major cognitive distortion. So a sister may not even avoid just conflicts in community. She may unwittingly then isolate herself from true blessings of the community because of that decreased sense of belonging. It can be a celebration, but if she's already withdrawn emotionally and is less invested maybe in preparing for community activity, there's somehow that she prevents herself from really receiving a fullness of a blessing of the true belonging that is hers. The more that I communicate with persons I don't actually live with or work with, the more that I can withdraw, and at the same time then that inauthentic sense of participation begins to evolve. And I think that Pope John Paul II, in his book, The Acting Person, spoke of non-authentic ways of participation. And he spoke of a very dangerous means of non-participation is conformism, where externally I may be doing all the right things, but internally my heart is not in it. And he said that's very, very dangerous to that sense of belonging and is very destructive to community, that non-authentic participation. I'd like to consider just briefly a little example. Sister Sarah was a patient advocate at a Catholic hospital. She was not responding to messages or complaints. She was missing meetings. Her paperwork was late or incomplete. All of this was because she was caught up in online relationships that had nothing to do with her apostolic work. She complained that real life was paperwork and angry, demanding patients and staff. Nothing but headaches, she said. The internet was more interesting, less troublesome, and could be accessed when she wanted, without angry reactions from other people. Online, she could bring up those emails, and if it was something she wanted to answer, she did. If it was something she didn't want to answer, she accidentally deleted it or didn't get to it. So it was relationship on demand, shut on and shut off. How depersonalizing that even is when you stop and think about it. I understand that there are some persons who heard a woman say, well, if you don't like this phone call or how it's going or you want to get off the phone, just close your cell phone. And you can say, I'm sorry, I lost the cell. Mm-hmm. So what is happening to this interpersonal etiquette, and how is it that we aren't being quite honest in a way that we might not be comfortable saying, I am not comfortable with this conversation, or I can't talk right now, or whatever it might be, that we're doing things that have that isolating and withdrawing or cutting off effect with the persons that we're with, and it's easier to do when we're not face-to-face with them. So in closing, I'd like to read just briefly from Fraternal Life and Community. This is from paragraph 26. Ours is a time for edification and constant building. It is always possible to improve and to walk together towards a community that is able to live in forgiveness and love. Communities cannot avoid all conflicts. The unity which they must build is a unity established at the price of reconciliation. Imperfection in communities ought not to discourage us. So this is part of humanity. It's this side of heaven. These irritations can be occasions for us to grow. And I think if we remember that, because we all know that. Thank you. Sister Mary Prince will present next on the Church's call to religious to become experts in communion.